If your CEO stood right in front of you, no name tag, no title, would you recognize him? And if you witnessed an employee being humiliated right before his eyes, what would you think he'd do? This story began with an anonymous email and ended with a handwritten note that brought an entire system to its knees. A single mother whose hours were cut without reason, a young Vietnamese employee forced into silence, and a man who once wrote the company's code of conduct, now standing still, watching his own team be degraded, just to uncover what had rotted the very system he once took pride in building. This is the journey of an undercover CEO, and this is the video that will make you see your workplace differently. The automatic glass door of Rivermart number 12 hissed softly as it slid open, revealing a middle-aged man in a faded denim shirt and a low-brimmed baseball cap that shaded half his face. No one inside the store paid him any attention, and no one had any reason to. But if they had known that the man was Malcolm Rivers, the founder of the nationally renowned Rivermart supermarket chain, they might have looked up, or at least offered a polite smile. But no, not a single person. He stepped into a space wrapped in a kind of fog. No background music, no greetings, no laughter. Malcolm stopped at the produce section. The apples smelled sour, not from ripeness, but from age. The freezer in the back groaned like it was clinging to the last bit of cold it could muster. His eyes scanned the shelves. Items were misaligned, dented boxes were still sitting out, and a buy two get one free sign was flipped upside down, bent beneath the gust of a ceiling fan. Everything seemed to whisper the same thing. This place had lost its soul. His gaze settled on checkout lane 3, where a woman was ringing up a customer. She looked to be in her 30s, hair hastily tied back. Her dark uniform faded at the cuffs. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the scanner. She smiled at the customer, but it wasn't a natural smile. It was strained, stiff, like someone had once trained her to service her emotions. Malcolm saw her lift her sleeve to her eye, not because of dust, but because of tears. He walked toward the shelf near her register and pretended to examine boxes of cereal, but in truth, he was watching her every movement. What was her name? And why was she crying mid-shift? He had once designed the Riverheart program, the human-centered core of Rivermart's culture, built on the idea that people are not tools and compassion is not a luxury. And yet here, in the very heart of his own store, he was watching an employee try to hide her pain behind the uniform he had chosen the fabric for, the color for, the embroidered lettering for. No one stood near him. No one knew who he was. And in that fleeting moment, Malcolm realized something terrifying. In the place that once embodied his vision, his values, and his life's work, he was completely invisible. Suddenly, loud footsteps echoed from behind. A large man in a black vest with "supervisor" stitched across the chest stormed through like a thundercloud. His face was flushed, collar unbuttoned, and he slapped a clipboard against his palm like a gavel ready to deliver sentence. He marched toward the checkout. No one stopped him. No warning was given. "Crying on shift again, Alyssa?" The voice wasn't scolding. It was humiliating. It crashed into the air like a sledgehammer hitting concrete. The woman, Alyssa, froze mid-motion as she handed the change to the customer. Her face went pale. "How many times do I have to say it? If you can't control your emotions, then don't come in. Don't drag down the whole team with you." Alyssa quickly turned away, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. She muttered, "I'm sorry. I'll be okay." But her voice was choked. No employee spoke up. The customer behind her remained silent, and an older woman quietly turned her gaze away. Malcolm clenched his hands inside his jacket pockets. He had once believed the system he built would protect people like Alyssa, those who needed their jobs not just to survive, but to keep hope alive. And now that very system was crushing her. He wondered, if he hadn't been here today, would this same scene unfold again tomorrow? Brent, that was the man's name. Yes, it came back to him. Turned and walked away like he had just finished cleaning up the emotional mess at the checkout. No one saw him off. No one dared look him in the eye. The air afterward felt like the aftermath of a storm. Alyssa shakily resumed her scanning, her voice as soft as paper brushing wind. "Thank you. Have a nice day." But it was no longer a wish. It was a reflex. Malcolm stepped back, eyes still locked on Alyssa. She was holding herself together in front of the world, not shouting, not resisting, just standing still, enduring, and trying to make it through her shift. As the line thinned, Alyssa gently leaned against the counter, one hand gripping the edge of her shirt, the other braced against the register. Malcolm could see her lips pressed tightly, her face straining like a dam about to break from a rising flood deep within. This girl was collapsing, bit by bit. And the cruelest part was, no one was there to catch her. Malcolm turned away, pretending to browse the candy aisle. But his mind was recording everything. Alyssa's downcast eyes, the sighs from other staff, the cold silence of a place that once stood for kindness and fairness. He saw a young employee trip over an unattended pallet, get up without saying a word. An elderly woman stood waiting at the service desk for 3 minutes. No one acknowledged her. In the frozen foods section, a female staff member strained to stick a price label high up, her shoulder trembling under the effort. No one needed to say it. They were all worn out, not from laziness, but because they had lost the belief that they mattered to this place. Malcolm walked slowly toward the cookware section. He picked up a cheap aluminum pan, but his mind was back at a meeting 3 weeks earlier. On that conference table, between charts and colorful revenue graphs, there had been an unmarked brown envelope, no name, no return address. Just a scrawled note. Someone is being pushed to the edge. Come before it's too late. The regional director had scoffed when Malcolm brought it up. Probably some Gen Z kid upset about not getting a raise. Another chimed in, we get complaints every week. If we stopped for each one, we'd get nothing done. Malcolm didn't argue, but he didn't forget. Not because the letter was correct, but because of how it was written. It wasn't a complaint. It was a cry for help. And now, looking at Alyssa, he knew the letter was telling the truth. And only one person had the authority to change any of this. Him. He placed the pan back on the shelf, eyes drifting back to the register where Alyssa stood. Posture a little straighter, but her eyes still as cloudy as unwashed glass. Tomorrow, Malcolm Rivers would return to this place. But not as the founder. He would come as a temp worker named Mal, stepping into the crowd of strangers, not to audit performance, but to protect the ones being drowned in silence. Brent turned his back and walked away, shoulders stiff like steel columns, his heels pounding the floor like a judge's gavel. Behind him was a hollow silence left for Alyssa and the bowed heads of those around. No one said a word. Not a single employee stepped in. No apology came from the manager who had just humiliated a subordinate in public. Alyssa remained standing, eyes red but her face frighteningly blank, as if she had learned how to erase tears from her expression and turn pain into silence. Malcolm stood behind the pastry shelf, his hands gripping the edge of the wooden frame so tightly that his fingers turned pale. He had never imagined he would witness something like that. A woman just trying to get through her shift to support her child being berated like trash by her own manager. Right under the large Rivermart logo on the ceiling, a symbol of community and compassion that he had bled for, poured his time into building. And now he could no longer deny it. The rot had started from within. He remembered the day he signed the Code of Conduct, the Riverheart Pledge, with its first line engraved on the wall of every branch office. No one shall be shamed for being vulnerable, and no one shall be punished for being human. And yet today, the very manager tasked with upholding that code had openly turned an employee into a toy for his power trip, under the indifferent stares of customers and co-workers. Malcolm stepped back toward the frozen section. He needed to get out of sight, to breathe again. Not because he felt weak, but because he was angry. A different kind of anger. Quiet, icy, creeping along his spine like glacial melt. He spotted a young man named Eli quietly restocking frozen chicken, his narrow shoulders hunched, bangs falling over his brow, silent. He had been there when Brent berated Alyssa. He hadn't reacted, hadn't flinched, as if he were part of the shelving unit. But it was exactly that silence that caught Malcolm's attention. Because he knew, sometimes the ones who say nothing are the ones who see the most. As Malcolm passed by, Eli gave a faint nod and continued working. No avoidance in his gaze, no complaint in his posture. He wasn't afraid, but he didn't trust anyone either. That kind of silence wasn't resignation. It was the silence of someone who had been taught, even if you speak, no one will listen. Malcolm reached the end of the aisle and sat beside an abandoned pallet. A box of cookies had fallen out of its packaging and rolled to his feet. He picked it up, returned it to its spot, but his eyes were still on Alyssa from afar. She continued working as if nothing had happened, but that in itself made her collapse all the more visible. No one can truly break down when they live in fear of being labeled a burden. He remembered the letter, that thin slip of paper buried among stacks of dry financial reports. At the time, the whole meeting room had dismissed it like a spam email. Only Malcolm remained silent, but deep down he knew that shaky handwriting was terrifyingly real. Someone is being pushed to the edge. Don't wait until they never return. The edge. Something he had once believed his system would never drive people to. But what about now? A mother being dropped from the schedule because her child was sick. A young worker at risk of being cut loose for coughing during a shift. A manager being rewarded for making employees shut up. He wandered quietly toward the snack aisle. Everything in the store was running on the rhythm of apathy. An elderly customer struggled to reach a packet of noodles on the top shelf, and no one stepped in to help. A sale sign lay tilted beside a trash bin, abandoned like a forgotten relic. Malcolm passed a janitor mopping the floor. The man didn't look up, didn't greet him, didn't speak. No one greeted anyone here anymore. The store no longer had good morning, no longer had shared glances. People avoided eye contact like even that could get them pulled into a private discussion in the back office. When he looked back at Alyssa, she was still attending customers with shaky but consistent hands. Malcolm felt something thump inside his chest. Not fear, but shame. Not because he had been deceived, but because he had let the system he built become this and hadn't even realized it. He had trusted in numbers, in reports, in KPIs, and heat maps. But none of those had ever warned him that a woman was crying because she couldn't afford gas, or that a child was taking cheaper medication because his mother had her hours cut. At that moment, an older woman stepped up to the checkout counter. She looked at Alyssa, then softly asked in a trembling voice, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Alyssa startled, as if she couldn't believe anyone had noticed. She nodded gently, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, ma'am." But Malcolm saw it. There was unease in the woman's eyes. She said nothing more, but before leaving she turned back and gently placed a folded note on the counter. Malcolm couldn't make it out, but he guessed. Maybe a phone number, maybe a few kind words. But at the very least it was an act, and in a place this dark, one flicker of light was enough to move him. Malcolm stepped quickly out of the store, not to leave, but to prepare for tomorrow. He stood in the parking lot, eyes following Alyssa as she straightened out receipts. A beat-up pickup truck revved in the distance. The sea breeze rolled in, carrying the salty tang of Tampa, Florida. But this time, it didn't make him feel free. It made him feel trapped, because the system he had created had turned into a cold, merciless machine, and he was the one who had fueled it. That night, Malcolm returned to a small roadside motel, a cheap room he'd rented to maintain his anonymity. He sat by the window, a cold cup of tea in front of him, next to an old laptop. He reopened the file on branch number 12. The manager's report: stable performance. No internal issues. Modest quarterly growth. Every line felt like a slap in the face. Because he knew now, when you only look at numbers, the death of a soul will never show up. He reopened the anonymous letter. The black ink still trembled on the page, like the writer's hand had been shaking from fear. But it was real, painfully real. "We're too afraid to speak, but if no one stops this, someone won't come back. We don't want rewards, we just want to be seen as people." He folded the letter carefully, then removed his watch, took off his glasses and set his phone aside. Tomorrow he would return, but not as Malcolm Rivers, CEO of Rivermart. He would return as a companion, a new employee, a nameless figure stepping into the very system he once built, to see what it had become, and whether it could still be saved. He stood up and drew the curtains. Outside it was a moonless night, but inside him, a small light had just begun to flicker. Not dazzling, not certain, but steady. Tomorrow he would listen, not with his ears, but with his heart. Tampa didn't have a true winter, but that morning the damp chill slipped beneath the skin as if the weather itself wanted to echo the mood inside Rivermart number 12. When the employee entrance opened at 6:02 a.m., there was no greeting, no laughter, no exchanged glances. The new day began in a silence that had no name. In the break room, Alyssa sat in the farthest corner, a plastic cup in hand filled with coffee as thin as the diluted hopes that had long been watered down by the indifference of the system. She stared at the wall clock, its minute hand ticking forward without needing anyone's encouragement. Unlike herself, who had to persuade her own body just to rise and face another shift. 2 days earlier, she'd been yelled at by Brent in front of customers. Again. Not because she was late or made a major mistake, just because she cried. And in the unwritten rules of this store, tears were forbidden, even if they came from a mother exhausted after her child had a severe asthma attack in the middle of the night. She had considered quitting. That night, sitting in her beat-up car with the rear window patched with duct tape, she stared at the blinking fuel light and thought, if I just don't come back tomorrow, no one would notice. But the next morning, by instinct, she still put on the uniform, still tied her hair back, still poured the coffee, and still walked into the store like a ghost too familiar with invisibility. Outside in the back lot, a middle-aged man wearing a name tag that read, Mal, was taking slow, deep breaths. Malcolm Rivers, or rather Mal, inhaled through his nose, exhaled slowly through his mouth, eyes fixed on the green-roofed building he had once considered the crowning achievement of his life. His uniform today was no longer a disguise. It was the real uniform of a low-level employee. No one in the store knew that the man stepping through the back door was the founder of the very system they worked under, and he didn't need them to know. Not yet. For now, he needed to become a part of the fractured machine. He needed to feel it with his hands, his feet, his eyes, his pulse. Not through spreadsheets and remote emails. He was assigned to the dry goods section, where the cereal boxes, spaghetti, seasoning packets, and cookies were shelved. His trainer was Eli Tran, the young man Malcolm had taken note of on the very first day. Morning, Eli said, voice soft, eyes averted. I'm Eli. I'm not a manager or anything, but they told me to train the new guy. Malcolm nodded. I'm Mal. Nice to meet you. Eli paused briefly, then carried on without responding to the courtesy. Each box has a code. Match the code to the shelf. Watch out for the broken pallet. Someone almost twisted an ankle last week. Malcolm followed, absorbing every step in rhythm. The morning air inside the store felt thick, like fog, not from fatigue, but because everyone had grown accustomed to erasing any emotional trace. The averted glances, the noiseless steps, the clipped yas. They were the unspoken language of a system operating as if someone had turned on mute from afar. As they shelved cereal boxes, Malcolm tried to make small talk. Eli, how long have you worked here? The young man paused without turning, then replied, 2 years. His voice was flat, like reciting from a contract. But the last few weeks, the vibe's been heavier. People don't talk as much. Malcolm nodded, sensing a small crack opening. He asked gently, like wind brushing past, is it because of management? Eli set the box down slower this time, voice low. Troy was better, but since Brent came in, it's like silence means survival. Malcolm asked nothing more, but he had heard enough. By mid-morning, Alyssa was assigned to register 4. She took the scanner, punched in her code, checked the keyboard, each movement automatic. In the office, Brent watched her through the CCTV feed, his expression blank as if observing a meatpacking line. In the break room corner, Linda, a senior staff member with neatly tied silver hair, checked her watch and slipped a cheap painkiller packet into her pocket. She said nothing, just stood, rinsed her cup, and returned to begin her second shift of the day. No one asked Linda if she was getting enough rest between shifts. No one asked why her face always looked like she was suppressing pain, because everyone already understood the silent rule. The less you speak, the more you get scheduled. Later that morning, Eli went into the break room, settling into a seat near the vending machine. Malcolm followed, grabbed a granola bar, and sat across from him. Neither spoke, but the silence no longer felt foreign. Eli broke it first. You look around a lot, different from other new hires. Malcolm didn't deny it. I've worked a few places, managed some too, but this place feels heavy. Eli nodded subtly, then suddenly dropped a sentence that froze Malcolm in place. I wrote the letter. No sound filled the room except the slow whirring of the ceiling fan. Malcolm set the granola bar on the table, eyes locked on Eli. You're sure? Eli gave a dry smile. No one knows. I used my left hand. Didn't sign it. But I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let more people go through what Alyssa did. Malcolm wanted to ask 100 questions, but they were all stopped by one overwhelming feeling. Admiration. Not because Eli acted, but because he was the first in this silenced machine to crack open a window and let truth breathe. Malcolm said softly, "Thank you." Eli looked at him, eyes still cautious. "I don't need thanks. I just want to see someone actually do something." That afternoon, Alyssa left early. Her hours had been cut down to just 15 per week. She didn't complain. She quietly took off her uniform, folded it, placed it in her bag, and walked out to the lot. Malcolm watched from afar, not to track her, but because he knew, if she broke one more time, this system might never be able to recover. She opened her wallet, flipping through papers, a utility bill, a gas debt notice, a photo of her son, wearing an oxygen mask in a hospital room, his eyes wide as if asking, "Will you still be here tomorrow?" Malcolm no longer needed anyone to explain what was happening. He had seen it. He had heard it. And now he would begin to unravel it all, starting with the schedule, starting with Brent, starting with a system that had learned to reward cruelty and punish compassion. Tomorrow he would return, and he would no longer be Mal. Malcolm stepped through the back door of Rivermart number 12 at 5:58 a.m. The first light of day hadn't yet reached the parking lot, but the delivery bay inside was already lit with a pale, cold yellow. The smell of plastic from freshly unwrapped pallets, mixed with the humid staleness seeping from the insulated walls, gave the early air a suffocating texture that had no name. On Malcolm's chest hung a name tag, printed clearly in black ink. Mal, probationary staff. No one asked who he was. No one spared him more than a second's glance. A new hire here was just another shadow joining a workforce that ran on silence and avoidance. Eli was the first to speak, but only just loud enough to hear. Dry goods aisle hasn't been stocked yet. You help me with the spaghetti and pancake mix. Malcolm nodded. The young Vietnamese-American man remained as composed as always. Not rushed, not careless, but never showing emotion either. Eli wasn't exactly warm, but one thing was clear. He watched more than he spoke, and in a place like Rivermart Branch number 12, that might be the only way to survive. There's an unspoken rule here, Eli said as they dragged the first pallet into Area A3. Stay quiet, stay on the schedule, speak up, lose your hours. Malcolm froze for a beat. That sentence wasn't a warning. It was a fact that had evolved into an operational principle. Malcolm knew that better than anyone. He was the one who had designed the automated scheduling system 3 years ago, believing that data could ensure fairness. But what he hadn't anticipated was how quickly people would learn to manipulate that data in unethical ways. Faster than software could evolve. They continued shelving. The packets of noodles lined up neatly by SKU code, the pancake mix stacked in perfect order, as if no ethical crisis were quietly unfolding within the very system they served. But Malcolm saw everything. The way Eli glanced at the ceiling cameras, the subtle way he turned his name tag inward while walking past the management office. These small gestures were the hallmarks of a culture shaped by fear. Mid-morning, Malcolm was called to assist at Register 5 after the assigned cashier called out unexpectedly. Alyssa wasn't there today. Her schedule had been reduced to just 8 hours a week, an amount that couldn't sustain survival, let alone a single mother raising a sick child. Malcolm stepped into position, scanner in hand, feeling more clearly than ever the mechanical rhythm that had been etched into the bodies of every worker here. Scan, tap, make change, smile, repeat. Automated like machines, but with the constant tension of knowing that even the smallest misstep could land them on some invisible blacklist managed from an office with closed blinds. While people queued, a middle-aged man looked at Malcolm and said, "You're new? Hang in there. A few more weeks and you'll know who makes it and who doesn't." Malcolm nodded with a thin smile, his chest tightening. Not from fear, but because the statement was too real, too cold, too normal for a place he once dreamed would be a home for overlooked laborers. During the lunch break, Malcolm retreated to a corner of the break room. On the table sat a thick, spiral-bound shift ledger, left unattended. A staff member had just checked it and hadn't locked the screen. Malcolm glanced. Alyssa Moreno's name appeared with 3 blank shift slots. In the internal notes section, a slanted line read, "Unreliable, child issues." Below that, Linda's name was listed, scheduled from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights straight. Malcolm swallowed. A woman near 60 being assigned back-to-back overnight shifts, while the preferred staff got easier morning hours and early clockouts. Brent wasn't just running this place with authority. He had turned the shift schedule into a weapon, rewarding and punishing based on personal whims. He used labor optimization as a cover to impose control, isolate the vulnerable, and extinguish resistance using hours. What shocked Malcolm more than the cruelty was the calculation. Every notation, every minor change in the schedule had a precise motive. No one knew, no one asked, because no one was allowed to. That afternoon, while helping restock the baking aisle, Malcolm spotted Linda struggling to lift a heavy box of flour. No one helped. Her back was hunched, sweat running in streaks, her face contorted every time she raised her arms. He stepped forward, silently took one side of the box. Linda turned, surprised. "You're new?" Malcolm nodded. "Yeah, just thought I'd help." Linda said nothing more, but her eyes spoke clearly. It had been a long time since anyone helped without being told. As his shift ended, Malcolm passed the operations office. Brent was watching the wall-mounted mini TV and scribbling notes onto a clipboard. The door was slightly ajar, and Malcolm caught part of a conversation between Brent and another subordinate. "Linda, cut another shift next week. And Alyssa, let her stand around. Who needs people like that anyway?" His voice was curt, indifferent, as if he were clearing shelf space, not reshaping someone's life. Malcolm gripped his bag strap tightly. Not out of surprise, everything was now undeniable. The scheduling system, once meant to balance fairness, had become a cold weapon in the hands of someone entrusted with power but lacking a heart. But Malcolm didn't walk in. He didn't confront. Not yet. Not when so much remained unclear. Who else on the team stayed silent? Who saw but turned away? And who would dare to stand up if someone else went first? That evening, he returned to the small motel where he'd been staying all week. On the wooden table lay a printed shift map from the internal system. Small annotations, crossed-out names, labels like unreliable. He marked each one: Alyssa, Linda, Eli. Each person a node in the network of hour-cut victims. But he also flagged others, those given perfect hours, high-traffic slots, bonus overtime without request. They all shared one trait: proximity to Brent. Malcolm folded the paper. Tomorrow he would no longer be Mal. He would use his real name to restore dignity to those who had been silenced for not fitting into a so-called staffing strategy. He didn't need them to believe him. He only needed them to know someone had heard. That night, Malcolm sat alone in the musty hotel room, the dim desk lamp casting a dull glow over the screen of an old laptop. His uniform shirt was still draped over the chair, his shoes still on his feet, but he wasn't paying attention to any of that. On the screen was the internal admin panel of Rivermart, accessed through a high-level technician account. A backdoor login he had authorized years ago for emergency security breaches. He had never imagined he'd need to use it. But the system now wasn't just facing technical issues. It was being twisted by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate the data, leaving no visible trace. He typed into the search bar the first name, Alyssa Moreno. Her shift chart appeared, dominated by grayed-out blocks. Her hours had plummeted week after week, 28, then 19, then 12, then 8. Internal note: unreliable, family distraction. He typed next. Linda Vargas. A schedule almost entirely composed of night shifts, 5 consecutive days, interspersed with erratic morning shifts that forced her to return to the store after only a few hours of rest. Note, not adaptable, over-complains. Malcolm frowned, then typed, Eli Tran. His hours were relatively stable, 20 to 25 hours a week. But what caught Malcolm's attention wasn't the quantity, it was the timing. Eli's shifts were always isolated from the rest, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., or 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., scattered, irregular, with no two shifts alike in a week. A short note read, quiet, not leadership material. Malcolm leaned back in his chair. Everyone he cared about shared a common trait. They were all marked by the system as non-strategic. But what did strategic mean here? Obedience? The ability to look away? Or the capacity to survive in a toxic environment without showing any trace of resistance? He scrolled further down to access the anonymous complaint portal, the very source where the whistleblower letter to headquarters had originated. This section was designed for emergencies. Most employees didn't even know it existed. The letter had come from here. No name, no ID, just a system entry submitted from device RT12-04, one of the 4 employee kiosks in the break room. Date submitted 3 weeks ago. Time, 2:37 p.m., Wednesday. Malcolm closed his eyes. He remembered clearly. Wednesday 3 weeks ago was the day the system flagged a slight revenue dip at branch 12. But Brent had reported internally that everything was under control. Under control. That phrase now sounded like mockery. He opened the security camera footage from the break room that day. The file was heavy. It took several minutes to load. The screen displayed a top-down view, a small break room, 3 metal tables, a vending machine, a microwave. At 2:35 p.m., Eli entered. He came in alone, not carrying food, stood by the kiosk for a moment, glanced around, then quietly typed on the keyboard. Not long after, he walked out again, posture upright but moving slower than usual. Malcolm froze the frame. That boy, the one who always lowered his head when Brent passed, who avoided eye contact around strangers, who always sat at the farthest end of the room, was the very person who had sparked all of this. A young man, no title, no voice, had chosen to breach the wall of silence in the simplest way, by speaking up, anonymously, risking that no one might hear, but he did it anyway. Malcolm didn't pick up the phone, didn't rush to find Eli. Instead, he just sat there, silently staring at the pause frame showing the slanted profile of a boy the system had rendered invisible. In Eli, Malcolm saw a version of his younger self, back when he was a stock boy at a local grocery store in the Bronx, watching his mother get chewed out by a manager for missing work to care for his dying father. He remembered the feeling, wanting to scream but unable to form the words. He had carried that memory when he built Rivermart, but somewhere along the way, amid growth, digitization, optimization, he had gotten lost. And now a young man like Eli, without authority, without recognition, had brought him back. The next morning, Malcolm arrived earlier than usual. Eli was already there, checking inventory in the canned goods section. Malcolm didn't rush to him. He simply observed. A quiet worker, small in frame, eyes constantly flicking as if always scanning for threats. But one thing Malcolm now knew for certain, inside that cautious exterior was a small flame, enough to light up the entire system if someone just breathed the right way. Later, while shelving boxes together, Malcolm softly said, "You once told me silence is how people survive here, but you didn't stay silent." Eli didn't look at him, but the hand holding the box of noodles paused. Malcolm continued slowly, "I know you wrote the letter." Eli exhaled deeply, then looked at Malcolm for the first time. In his eyes was exhaustion, but no regret. "I didn't expect anyone to believe it. I just couldn't let it keep happening." Malcolm nodded. "You know, your letter changed everything." Eli looked surprised, but still guarded. Malcolm smiled faintly. "I'm Malcolm Rivers." Eli froze, his mouth slightly open as if to ask. But then he said nothing. This silence wasn't defensive. It was listening. And Malcolm understood. From this silence, something new was about to begin. Afternoon spilled over Tampa in a harsh golden hue, but inside the manager's office of Rivermart Branch Number 12, the glow from the computer monitors felt colder than the dry goods freezer aisle. The room wasn't large, but Brent had set it up like a fortress. Blinds always drawn, an office chair elevated above standard height, two computer monitors angled to block the view from the door, and a pile of handwritten notes stacked neatly on the desk. Shift analyses, circled names, slashed through rosters, scribbled with keywords that didn't appear in any official policy. Troublesome, frequent absence, soft, hard to manage. Malcolm stood outside the partially open door, his back straight, hands in his pockets, silently observing the scene. Nothing looked technically wrong, but everything was. He knocked 3 times. Brent looked up, frowned briefly, then shaped his mouth into a thin smirk. "You're the new guy, Mal?" Malcolm nodded. "I just wanted to ask something small about the shift schedule." Brent leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, voice dry. "I don't usually discuss schedules with temps, but you've got 3 minutes. Go." Malcolm stepped inside, eyes locked on Brent. "I'm just wondering why some people keep getting their hours cut, while others always have the best shifts. Isn't fairness supposed to be the point of scheduling?" Brent shrugged and waved a hand like brushing off dust. "Fairness is theoretical. In practice, I've got to keep this machine running smoothly. People like Alyssa, too emotional, affects team morale. Linda, too old, slows everything down. Eli, doesn't know how to engage. I can't let a weak lineup hurt revenue." Malcolm stood still. His heart didn't race, but every word Brent dropped landed like dust-coated bricks, thudding against his skull like silent declarations of war. Brent continued, his tone breezy as if talking about the weather. "I don't fire anyone. I just shrink the margins. Let them figure out they don't fit. They walk on their own, cleaner that way. No paperwork, no HR involvement." Then he raised an eyebrow, tilting his head like he was sharing a trade secret. "And the best part? It works. Costs down, productivity up, reports look good. Everybody's happy." Malcolm stared at him for several seconds. He didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't object. He just looked, a stare that was weighty, deep like lead and sharp like shattered glass. Brent had no idea that the man in front of him wasn't a temp. Not Mal, but Malcolm Rivers, the man who had built the foundation of the very system Brent had turned into a tool for crushing the most vulnerable employees. Malcolm turned and walked out of the office. No goodbye, no argument, just a small nod. But in his mind, everything was now certain. Brent hadn't made an accidental mistake. He was deliberate, and he believed no one would ever find out. Malcolm didn't need to debate. He wasn't here to convince someone like Brent. He was here to prove, to act, to dismantle the fragile pyramid of power Brent had built, brick, by returning to the core question, who gets to decide what efficiency means? As he stepped out of the office, he spotted Eli changing price tags in the snack aisle. The young man gave him a subtle nod, then continued sticking the new labels. Malcolm walked up, said nothing at first, simply stood beside him for a few seconds before asking quietly, "If you were scheduled to work with Alyssa tomorrow, how would you feel?" Eli froze, silent. Then after a pause, he replied, "She's the only one who ever asked for time off on my behalf when I had a sore throat. Management told me, the less noise, the better. I'd love to work with her, but they don't schedule us like that." Malcolm nodded. "What if I told you you will be starting next week?" Eli turned to look at him. No suspicion, no confusion. Just a stillness mixed with something that had long been buried under layers of self-defense. Hope. That night in the break room after closing, Malcolm asked Alyssa to stay a moment. She was putting away her scanner, shoulders slouched, eyes lowered. "Do you have a few minutes?" She paused, hesitated slightly, then nodded. They sat at one of the cold metal tables. 2 people, 2 cups of water from the dispenser. Malcolm began, "I've seen how you work, and I've seen how you've been treated." Alyssa didn't look up, but her hand tightened around the plastic cup, almost crushing it. "I'm not looking for pity," she said quietly. "I just want to work like everyone else." Malcolm nodded. "This isn't pity. It's respect. And I want you to know, Brent will no longer be deciding your shifts moving forward. Alyssa looked up, her eyes full of disbelief. Why? Malcolm answered gently. Because I'm the one making that decision now. I'm Malcolm Rivers. A name dropped onto the table like a small stone, breaking the surface of a still lake. Alyssa said nothing, but her grip on the cup relaxed, and for the first time in days, a faint shimmer lit her eyes. Malcolm stood, gazing around the break room. In a few days, everything would begin to change. Not through declarations, but through action. Line by line on the schedule. Every cruel annotation erased. Every person like Alyssa, Eli, Linda, restored to their rightful place. And Brent, he would learn that there is no such thing as efficiency in a system where the people who keep it running no longer believe in justice. The plan was already in motion. Just one day after the quiet conversation between Malcolm and Alyssa in the break room, a strange new wind began to blow through Rivermart branch number 12. It didn't come from the internal system, nor from any newly issued policy. It came from the other side, from the people standing across the checkout counters, from the eyes that once remained silent, from the hands that had merely swiped cards and collected groceries. It came from an elderly customer whose name no one remembered, but whose action would be remembered for weeks. That old woman, somewhere in her 70s, thin build, sparse white hair, round glasses, had been present the day Brent publicly humiliated Alyssa in front of the line. She had been two places behind, holding a bunch of scallions and a carton of almond milk, quietly watching the entire scene like another shadow in the crowd. What no one knew was that she hadn't stayed silent. After leaving the store, she posted a lengthy review on a local Tampa community page. I used to think this store was a decent place, but today I saw a young woman being berated in public for crying. I don't know what happened to her, but I know what it feels like to be humiliated while no one speaks up, because it happened to me when I was young. The review wasn't sensational. No capital letters, no direct accusations. But there was something in the way she wrote that made it impossible to ignore. Maybe it was the calm tone. Maybe it was the raw sincerity. Maybe it tapped into a collective memory. The quiet shame felt by those who were once seen as nuisances, weaklings, inefficiencies, those whom the modern consumer world treats as operational glitches. Soon after, her post was shared by a local consumer culture blog called Bay South Report. The headline read, "When Empathy is Treated Like Weakness," a story from Rivermart. In under 24 hours, the article reached over 18,000 shares. The response wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Every comment, every share, like drops of water hitting the surface of a long inflamed system. A small wave, but strong enough to reach corporate headquarters. Inside the manager's office at Branch 12, Brent remained unaware. He continued running the store as if he were untouchable. Still cutting Alyssa's hours, still making Linda lift heavy flour bags, still scheduling Eli during fragmented shifts to keep him disconnected. But that morning, he received an email from the internal PR team. Branch 12 is receiving negative online attention. Please prepare a statement if requested. Brent sighed and tossed his phone on the desk. Social media, he muttered. Bunch of keyboard warriors. He didn't know that just across the office, one of his probationary hires had heard every word, and that hire was Malcolm Rivers. Malcolm understood the mechanics of virality all too well. In his years overseeing Rivermart, he'd seen how even a small complaint could shake the entire model. But this wasn't just a post or a critique. This was a spark, a crack on the supposedly impenetrable glass that Brent had wrapped in manipulation and silence. And once light enters a crack, the inside begins to show. That afternoon, Malcolm witnessed something new. A customer, a middle-aged woman, lingered in front of Alyssa longer than usual after paying. She didn't speak immediately, just looked at her for a moment, then softly said, "I read the article about you. If it's true, I'm on your side." Alyssa froze. Her hand stopped over the keypad. Her mouth searched for words. Being believed, here in a place where every tear was considered unprofessional, left her unsure how to react. But Malcolm saw her eyes shimmer. In the break room, Linda timidly asked Eli, "Did you read the news?" Eli nodded. Linda continued, I'm not sure who wrote it, but I know exactly how it feels to be called disruptive just for asking to swap a shift so I could care for my sick husband. Eli didn't respond, but he stayed in the room longer than usual. The pressure from outside wasn't loud, but it spread. Brent's superiors began sending more closely worded emails. An internal audit was scheduled. Human resources began reviewing the branch's turnover rates. A corporate Zoom meeting was set for the week entitled Well-Being in Store Culture Review Series. Things were shifting, and Malcolm knew the moment to act had arrived. That evening, he walked through the parking lot to the regional post office. In his hand was a thin envelope containing 3 printed documents, screenshots of the scheduling system, excerpts from the notes about Alyssa and Linda, and a transcribed audio clip of Brent saying, "I don't fire anyone. I just make them want to leave." Malcolm didn't sign his name, but he sent it directly to the Southeast Regional HR Oversight Division. He didn't need credit. He just needed another crack, because this system didn't need to be smashed. It only needed to be opened, just enough to let light in. The next day, Brent unexpectedly called a full staff meeting, the first in months. He spoke as if everything were still under control, but his eyes kept darting to his phone screen. His opening words, "There's been a bit of misunderstanding about our work culture," but no one looked up, because for the first time, no one feared him. They feared that if they kept looking down, there'd be nothing left worth holding on to. Alyssa didn't attend. She was assisting a customer when the meeting began, but she wasn't summoned, wasn't scolded, because today she was in the right shift, assigned by someone who had promised that from now on, no one would work a shift as punishment. That evening, Eli handed Malcolm a revised shift schedule. "I made a suggestion, if you want to give it a try." Malcolm took the paper, eyes scanning. Shifts were more cohesive, aligned for those with kids, evening classes, or caregiving responsibilities. A new system, crafted by someone once labeled as not leadership material. Malcolm said nothing, but his look was enough. Eli understood. The game had started to change. The next morning, a soft layer of fog hung over Tampa, just enough to make the parking lot in front of Rivermart number 12 feel like it was holding its breath. No one noticed the silver SUV parked at the far edge of the lot, where employees rarely went. No one paid attention to the man stepping out. Silver gray suit, pale blue tie, neatly combed salt and pepper hair, polished leather shoes. No one knew that in just a few minutes, the entire heartbeat of this branch would change forever. Malcolm walked directly through the front entrance, no longer circling to the loading dock as he had every other day. On his chest, there was no longer a plastic tag that read Mal, but a gleaming metal badge engraved with Malcolm Rivers, Chief Executive Officer. The receptionist froze for several seconds, unable to speak. A few employees stood still, eyes wide, hands still gripping brooms or clipboards. No one was entirely sure what they were seeing, but they all sensed that something was shifting. The automatic door opened again. Wind swept in, threading through the aisles, drifting into the darkest corners of the store, like an electric current being plugged in for the first time. Malcolm walked slowly, eyes straight ahead. He made his way to the operations office where Brent stood beside the printer, holding a large coffee mug, scanning the weekly report like he did every morning. He didn't look up, not until the gleaming leather shoes came to a stop just outside the door. Brent looked up, squinting. "Is there a prob—" The sentence stopped halfway. His eyes hit the nameplate. They widened, then sank. The mug in his hand trembled, coffee spilling over the rim. "You're—" Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile either. He spoke one sentence, calm and deep, like a bell ringing in a hollow cathedral. "I'm the one who heard everything, and now I need to speak to the man who turned this place into a machine that kills hope." Brent stepped back half a pace. Nothing could save him now. Not reports, not KP not excuses. Malcolm reached into his jacket and pulled out a black folder. He laid it on the desk, opened it. Inside were the past 3 months of shift schedules, internal notes on employees, email exchanges between Brent and the regional manager, and finally a copy of the anonymous letter that started it all. "I'm not here to hear your justifications," Malcolm said. "I'm here to end it." He took out another sheet of paper, a formal suspension order, signed by Regional HQ. Brent opened his mouth as if to argue, but nothing came out. Malcolm didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need threats, because the truth this time had already spoken. Brent Calloway, he said, each word clear and deliberate. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all managerial duties at Rivermart number 12. Pending the outcome of an HR investigation, Brent turned red, then pale, then nearly gray. You don't understand how hard it is here. I I had to maintain performance. They're they're not strong enough. Malcolm cut him off with a glance. They're human, and the performance you're protecting is burying them, one shift at a time. Malcolm walked out of the office. Brent remained frozen, arms limp, eyes darting around as if waiting for someone to step in. But no one came. The others had already formed small clusters near the cashier lanes. Alyssa looked over from Register 4. Linda, Eli, and even younger employees Malcolm hadn't learned the names of yet were frozen mid-task. Some whispered. Some looked down, unsure. A few, those once favored by Brent, instinctively backed away. Malcolm turned and spoke just loud enough. I need all employees in the break room in 10 minutes. Emergency meeting. No one resisted. No one asked why. Because in his eyes, everything was already clear. The break room had never been so full. People standing, sitting, leaning against shelves. Everyone held their breath. Malcolm stood before the faded Rivermart slogan on the bulletin board. I built this system, he began, but I let it grow without listening to the people who kept it alive. I'm not here to explain. I'm here to restart. Every eye was on him. Malcolm continued. I've heard about the cut shifts, the unfair notes, the way people have been reduced to numbers. And I'm sorry, because when a system starts evaluating dignity through bar charts, it's no longer an organization. It's a machine. His gaze landed on Alyssa. I once heard someone say tears are a sign of weakness. I don't believe that. I believe tears are the sign of courage that's been abandoned for too long. The room shifted slightly. Malcolm looked around, his voice lower now. I'm not asking you to forgive. I'm asking for a chance to make this right, starting by removing all schedule authority from this office. He held up a second paper. I'm handing temporary scheduling control to someone within this team, someone who's been misjudged, someone who's never been trusted, but who never gave up. He looked at Alyssa. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you the role of assistant operations manager. Alyssa froze. A whisper rippled through the crowd. Linda's hand clenched tightly. Eli quietly looked up. Alyssa stared at Malcolm, her eyes silently asking, Me? The one they called a burden? Malcolm nodded. I've seen you work. I've seen you fall. But what made me believe in you wasn't the day you stood tall. It was the days you still showed up, still served, still treated people kindly, even when no one treated you the same. Alyssa gripped her hands. Her eyes welled, but this time she didn't wipe them away. She just nodded, slow but steady. I'm not great, she said. I just know what it feels like to be treated like you don't belong here. Malcolm replied, and that's exactly why you're the right person to lead this team. The break room went silent, but it was a silence full of tension. Something had just been lifted off everyone's shoulders. Malcolm took a deep breath, his voice gentler now. I don't need you to do more. I just want you to believe that from this day forward, no one has to endure alone. That day, no one bowed their head as they walked out of the break room. After stepping out from the emergency meeting in the break room, Malcolm stood in front of the stainless steel bench, lined with dozens of eyes watching him. The air felt thick, as if suspended in the moment before a storm. Under the yellow light of the ceiling, he looked at every face, some tired, some cautious, some with a vague look as if unsure what lay ahead. Malcolm drew a deep breath, holding the silence long enough for that breath to mean something, to make everyone feel that finally someone had stood up and spoken. He began, voice warm but weighted. I didn't listen. I've been asleep in the comfort of my accomplishments, trusted pretty reports, but forgot to look for real smiles, believed that full water bottles meant everything was stocked, but forgot to ask whether the lips drinking from them could still speak to their families. I searched for efficiency and lost sight of dignity. For that, I take responsibility. Everyone watched him, their eyes searching for signs. Malcolm didn't lower his gaze. He looked directly into the faces of those the system had cast aside. He looked at Alyssa, her face flushed and wet, but no longer empty. We're starting again, not with words, with action. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a sheet of paper. I'm offering opportunity to two people. Ms. Alyssa Moreno, I'm offering you the role of assistant operations manager here. Not because you fell, but because you stood back up. And you're the only person who's proven that getting back up isn't a reason to be discarded. A low murmur spread across the room. Alyssa froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. Malcolm continued. You'll have access to the scheduling system, and I'll walk with you every step of the way. The employees turned toward Alyssa. Some smiled gently, others stood still. A few teared up quietly. The air felt like a pressure cooker that had just released its seal. Malcolm pressed on. Second, to ensure fairness, we're forming an internal review group to redesign our shift schedules with humanity in mind. Alyssa, Eli, and a few others. The first person to say something was wrong deserves a permanent voice at the table. Eli nodded softly, his eyes glowing faintly. Malcolm looked around the break room. All of you, you will be heard. No more hiding, no more fear. If a schedule doesn't fit your life, you have the right to speak up, as long as it helps us live better. He paused briefly, then added gently, all I ask is one thing. Speak truthfully. If your voice is strong, brave, and kind, this team will evolve. Alyssa was the first to stand, her hand gripping her name tag. Her voice trembled but carried conviction. I'm not the strong type, but I know how much a small presence can change someone's long day. Eli stood as well, extending his hand. He listened to me. Now it's his turn to lead. One by one, voices followed, not abstract theories, but real stories. Linda spoke of back pain from night shifts. A student employee said she couldn't afford tuition with so few hours. An older worker asked for morning shifts so he could make his medical appointments. Each story illuminated a shadowed corner of the system. The room grew warmer, not from heat, but awakening. The silence was no longer fear, it was awakening. Malcolm smiled faintly. We'll begin trialing the new schedule next week. Everyone can submit input. If anyone feels their hours don't work, speak. I, Alyssa, and Eli will review every request. He scanned the group. If even one person feels left behind, this team will never get better. No one asked him about bigger promises. They all understood. This was the first real promise from someone who had once hurt them, and that made it the most important step. A man who'd rather take responsibility than hide behind a wall of reports. After the meeting, many quietly returned to their tasks. Linda walked out holding her painkillers, but this time, she didn't lower her head. She turned slowly and nodded to Alyssa. Eli walked to the scheduling table and gently said, I've drafted a few shift options. Took a look last night. I believe we can make it work. Malcolm stood in the corner, watching the old wall clock tick forward, smiling slowly. He understood. Change hadn't come when he walked in or made a speech. It came from the way people began to look at one another again. From the way words finally emerged in air, once thick with silence. That afternoon, a customer walked up and quietly told Alyssa, Thank you for not staying silent. Alyssa simply smiled. It was a look of gratitude, a simple act people often forget to express. Malcolm passed by, nodding lightly. He knew he was no longer the one controlling from above. He had handed the reins to others, and now all he had to do was observe, not to supervise, but to believe that kindness could return. When night fell, the silhouette of Rivermart still cast shadows across the asphalt, bathed in yellow streetlight. But inside, tonight's footsteps were no longer walking in fear. They were walking toward one another, because now the last ones had finally been heard. The following afternoon, LED lights spilled across the old operations office, Brent's former space, haunted by the memories of a system that once erased people. Alyssa entered holding a bundle of printouts from the system, shift schedule XLSX, alongside Brent's old spiral notebook. The room was untouched, a dark wood desk, a compact printer by the window, drawn blinds, and a whiteboard still bearing faint ink stains. The air was dense, like the smell of paperwork sealed after years of audits. But today, what Alyssa carried was no longer a burden. It was a new responsibility, the duty to turn a scarred territory into a space of dignity. She sat at the desk and opened the notebook. Red pen scribbles formed rows of suffocation. Cut Linda's hours. Talks too much. Cassie, untrustworthy. Eli, not team compatible. Each line a tidy excuse to treat someone as less than whole. Each one a reason to reduce a human to a cell in an optimization spreadsheet. Alyssa closed her eyes. One question echoed in her mind like a firm reminder. Who holds this power? And she knew. Now she did. But this power came not from a cold, managerial chair, but from trust. She set the notebook aside, then opened the Excel file. Columns of dates, hours, employee names, followed by a new annotation column. Considerations: single parent, current student, family caregiver, tenured team member. The first line she typed: Linda Vargas, morning shift, 6 to 2, 5 days a week. The next: Cassie Edwards, 10 to 6, stable. Then came Eli Tran, followed by 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., flexible, adjustable. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, she typed in bold red, every working hour is a piece of someone's life. No one has the right to cut it away. She clicked save. The first feeling was a wave of essential relief. Then she looked up through the small window, not back into the outside world, but into herself. She was no longer a shadow. She was someone redefining her role in the system. Just then, her phone buzzed. A text from Malcolm. Perfect. Now distribute the schedule to each person. They'll understand. Alyssa typed back quickly. Sent. Thank you. As she stepped out of the office, she saw Linda waiting nearby, her gaze slightly trembling. You gave me a morning shift and weekends off. Alyssa nodded. You deserve that. Linda smiled, her eyes shimmering. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like just a cog in the machine. She felt like a person of value. Alyssa continued into the scheduling area, where Eli was printing new copies and handing them out. A few employees huddled around, checking their shifts. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was talking, not loud but no longer silent. Someone approached Alyssa quietly. The morning shift fits my class schedule perfectly. I really appreciate you. Alyssa only smiled in return, but deep down, she could feel trust beginning to bloom. Meanwhile, in a back office, Brent sat in a small room staring at his screen. He was reviewing the new roster, the staff list, and the internal feedback system. His morning sleep had been peaceful, but now he realized he had lost the only control he ever had, the power to keep others silent. Malcolm walked in, without knocking. Brent flinched. Malcolm looked at him for a beat before saying, the system is finally moving in the right direction. Shifts are no longer measured by output, but by fairness. I appreciate how your silence trained me to get here. But now it's time to build a new foundation, one rooted in democracy and trust. Brent didn't respond, eyes locked on the data. In his gaze was a mixture of confusion and guilt. For the first time, he understood that every authoritarian decision had left a lasting wound. And now the system he built was healing itself. That evening in the break room, employees gathered again to discuss the new schedule. They didn't need a manager holding up a nameplate. What they needed was someone who would stand beside them. Personal stories emerged. A pregnant server needing fewer late shifts, a student asking for a single day to attend class, an older worker requesting midday breaks for medical visits. Each one was adjusted. No disruption, no imbalance. Just a balance rooted in empathy and shared authority. As the lights dimmed, Alyssa's hand still hovered over the keyboard. She quietly turned over her temporary name tag. No longer probationary staff, just her real name, Alyssa Moreno. Under that light, she wasn't anyone else. She was the one who changed things. And tonight, the system no longer encoded cruelty. It was returning to its ability to understand and to love. The morning at Rivermart Branch number 12 began with a different sound. No longer the cold clatter of shelves bumping in silence, but gentle, thoughtful questions poured into customers' ears with quiet warmth. Eli Tran now stood at checkout lane 2, not hunched like the past several months, but upright, offering a tentative smile to an elderly customer waiting to pay. He asked softly, "You having a good day, ma'am?" then instinctively leaned in just enough to help pull her basket closer. His hands moved each item gently, not in the rushed rhythm usually seen under surveillance. Even his thank you came out clearly, not loud, just enough to make the listener feel heard, feel respected. It was a scene never seen before at branch number 12. In the past, greetings like hello and thank you were absent during peak hours because staff feared that speaking up would slow down checkout time and affect performance metrics. Eli had once been nearly invisible. Now he was fully himself, not afraid, not performing by hiding his humanity. Not far from there, in the store's left corner, Linda Vargas was restocking the fruit display. Her elbows trembled slightly as she arranged apples on the tray. But when she noticed Ellen, a middle-aged regular customer, watching nearby, she paused, turned around and smiled. "Would you like to try our sweet apples today?" She cheerfully offered tips about nutrition and how to pick the juiciest fruit. Ellen lit up. "I came back for your smile." For the first time in years of early shifts, Linda was met not with weary glances, but a genuine exchange. She bowed her head slightly in gratitude, unafraid for once. The scene spread like a small fire. Customers started sharing feedback. A delivery driver standing near the exit looked up at the wall screen showing the store's average rating. It had once hovered at 3.8 stars, now it flashed 4.5. He paused, stared into the screen, then pulled out his phone to leave another 5-star review. "Feels good to see kindness return." A few older customers, after checking out, asked newer staff, "Did something change in the store?" A young man of Caribbean descent nearby chimed in, "They use a new schedule now that helps folks like my mom. She needs her mornings free for doctor visits." The group nodded and smiled. Another customer added, "The store feels friendlier now. I like being greeted like a neighbor, not just a transaction." And so the little words started spreading. No marketing campaign, no press release, just quiet truth. By early afternoon, a wave of customers had come and gone, leaving behind a quiet moment caught by the surveillance camera near checkout lane 3. A series of exchanged glances and the first string of genuine smiles seen in many months. Not flashy, but warm. Malcolm stood behind the large glass window, observing the floor. He noticed every step carried more confidence. Every glance was more intentional. He didn't step forward to play the hero. He was simply the father who passed on the guiding baton, silently from behind, smiling, so that the confident footsteps and kind eyes could write their own new story. Malcolm deeply felt that transformation had begun with the smallest people, not from grand policies but from individuals, Eli, Linda, and the customers who were finally asked how they were doing. That, he realized, was the unexpected force waking up the entire chain. And suddenly it became clear. A place once governed by silence was now thriving because of the ability to speak up, to look at one another, to restore the ability to be human within an industrialized society. As night fell, the store's warm lights still glowed gold. Malcolm turned and stepped into the elevator. Each step was soft but steady, a dream returning to reality, a system healing through countless quiet human breaths. Nothing dramatic, just the simple way kindness returns among people once hurt. And everyone knew, when kindness returns, the system cannot go back. It has been changed forever. On Monday morning, the early summer sunlight streamed through the front glass of the store, illuminating the checkout counter where Alyssa stood. Everything seemed as routine as any other day, but the atmosphere had changed in a quiet, unmistakable way. People who once walked in with caution now entered with noticeably lighter expressions. A shy new staff member asked how to arrange the pastry trays, and instead of the usual dismissive look, Eli bent down and explained patiently, his voice calm and steady. As for Alyssa, she wasn't wearing the manager uniform, nor the name tag that symbolized authority. She wore a simple company shirt, her hair neatly tied back, her makeup light, but her gaze full of confidence. She didn't need to declare who she was. The whole store knew. But before her morning shift began, she stepped into Brent's old office. That room had once been the epicenter of everything wrong. The desk, once buried under old post-it notes, had been cleared. But the wall remained blank, as if to remind everyone of the invisible power that once suffocated the entire system. Alyssa took out a pre-printed A4 paper, the text aligned and ink crisp. Work schedules are meant to support, not to punish. If someone cries because they're afraid of losing their job, then the system is broken. She pinned the paper in the center of the wall without asking for permission. No executive meeting, no internal memo. It wasn't a slogan, it was a moral declaration, a message to the version of herself from 3 months ago, the girl who once trembled while holding a resignation letter, convinced she no longer had value. Now no one would have to walk out like that again. Exiting the room, she walked through the areas that had once been quiet zones, places where saying the wrong thing meant losing your shift the next day. Now employees referred to one another by their real names, not nicknames or scheduling codes. Linda, the woman who once had her hours cut for talking too much, was now standing with a customer, chatting about seasonal pastries. Malcolm, now back at the main office, continued silently tracking the transformation of this place. But he no longer needed to step in, because the most important thing had already happened. The culture had started to shift on its own. That afternoon, an older woman pushed open the door. She was the same person who had posted about Brent weeks earlier. She looked at Alyssa for a long moment. No words. Until she finally smiled and pointed to a cinnamon roll. "Could you wrap that one up for me?" Alyssa nodded. As she handed the pastry over, they looked at each other, not as cashier and customer, but as two people who had witnessed the truth, and both chose not to stay silent. Her shift ended at 7 p.m. Alyssa grabbed her bag, walked to the car, inserted the key into the ignition. The car was old, but the gas tank was full. Not because of charity, not because of coupons, because her paycheck now matched her effort. No more unfairly reduced hours. She no longer had to pull into gas stations and drive away without filling up. No more counting coins in her wallet. No more telling her son, "We'll get it next time." She reached into the back seat and gently pulled a blanket over her child. The boy was fast asleep, arms wrapped around a tiny teddy bear, a late birthday gift she couldn't afford last month. She placed her hand on his shoulder, leaned in and whispered, "Mom didn't give up, and from now on, no one will have to go through it alone." At that very moment, in the office, the words beneath the newly pinned paper had begun to spread. Eli had taken a photo and shared it in the internal employee group chat. "If you see yourself in this story, leave a single dot. We're listening." No long speeches, no viral clip, just a dot. But those dots began appearing across the system, from Minnesota to Austin, from Las Vegas to Des Moines, wherever someone had once feared their schedule like an invisible blade. When Malcolm received the printed summary, he said nothing. He simply picked up a red pen and circled the final sentence on the page. No one has the right to cut away a piece of someone's life, just because they have less power. The next day, all branches received a new directive. It didn't include KPIs. It didn't mention marketing strategies. It contained only one sentence. Work schedules are a matter of ethics. The system didn't change because of a memo. It changed because someone who had once been a victim stood up and laid down a new foundation. And this time, that person wasn't the CEO. It was a girl who once got scolded for crying behind a cash register. That person was Alyssa. And then, in the office, a place that was once the center of control and fear, a small line of text appeared beneath the sheet of paper pinned to the wall. No logo, no title, just a simple message, yet powerful enough to reach hearts that had been silent for far too long. If you've ever seen yourself in this story, leave a single dot. We're listening. Just a dot, but it became a symbol. People began leaving it beneath internal posts, in team meetings, on sticky notes next to the time clock. No need for arguments, no need for tears. Just a single dot, enough to say, "I've felt that pain too." And if you, the one watching this video, have ever been forced into silence, ever had your hours cut just for asking why, ever watched someone weaker be pushed out of the game for being not the right fit, then you are not alone. Leave a single dot in the comments, so we and everyone else know that you're still here, that you're still standing, and that you deserve to be heard.